Welcome to Master Surveillant Mindset here on Northwest Digital News. We're going to have a conversation about retail crime here on the broadcast today. Darin Fredrickson sitting over here to my right, Kevin Hunter here in the center, and Kyle Torgerson.
Ooh,
He didn't know who he was going to be today.
Actually, my name this time.
Yeah, it's actually his name, his born name today. Anyhow, we're going to visit about retail crime. We want to talk about this crime ring that was recently busted down in Florida, Darin, $2 million that they account for. You actually know or have heard of this Sheriff Grady Judd, who was leading the bust on these guys.
Engages with law enforcement, and he's well known in the retail community as getting the job done. And there's cases like this all over the country, but a lot of times the challenge is getting law enforcement to start working it and go forward with it. And Sheriff Judd is one of those guys that does it. And just you look at the complexity of this case. It's a $2 million case over 13 counties, and the bad guys out there play that trick of trying to go to different jurisdictions so that you can't put all the crimes together. But if you do the case right, you can get that done. And 6 search warrants. I mean, we're talking a huge operation here, and definitely kudos out to Sheriff Judd out there in Florida for taking down this group. This is awesome.
What's interesting is
impact.
Lawmakers come up with these situations they make the threshold of accomplishing a felony charge against these bad guys very difficult, don't they?
They do. And the bad guys, the ones that are organized and know what they're doing, they know those thresholds and they know what dollar value they have to stay under. And so they'll just, they can hit repeated stores and keep that dollar value below the threshold. And if you don't get a detective that can take those cases and put them together to get the felony dollar value, then you're not going to get it done. And in some jurisdictions, it's even still tough. I'm not going to name them, but there's one I traveled to this jurisdiction on a guy that was hitting the entire country, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of dollars. And literally, he lived on the road, and I was tracking him, and I believed he was going to go to the city. I went to the city, set up, called a detective, and said, "This guy's going to land here. I anticipate he's going to drive in, and he's going to hit a whole bunch of stores, but his threshold was around under $75 per store." And the detective told me, "You're not going to get a felony crime." And I said, "What if I put them all together?" He said, "You still aren't going to get a felony crime." So it depends on the jurisdiction, and these organized criminals know what the laws are, and they'll use it to their advantage.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
For people that were wondering what happens, this is particularly talking about organized retail crime. If they were wondering what the average theft is, this is actually reported by a few different agencies out there. This one comes off of losspreventionmedia.com. But they shared in 2015 that the average shoplifting accounted for $317 per incident. That was in 2015. Then in 2017, that number shot up to $800 per incident. And then in 2018, fell back to $559 per incident. The 800 is like just kind of off the charts from my perspective, and so is 559. But why do you think it went backwards more than $600?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look and see where the stats came from, but a lot of times an $800 value figure, and you referred to it as shoplifting, which if the report refers to it as shoplifting, like the incident itself is a shoplift, but as we know, if you look into it, it's actually theft for resale. So it's trafficking in stolen property, it's organized retail crime. But for a dollar value to go from $800 per incident and then drop back down, you'd have to look at the stats and figure out, well, where did they get the stats from and what changed? A lot of times when you have an impact like that, retailers will employ certain strategies to basically make the merchandise being stolen harder to access. For example, baby formula is huge, and now in Arizona, a lot of the retailers that were getting hit very, very hard started locking it up, and so now you have to ask for it. And it's an inconvenience to consumers, and there's always that balance where the store doesn't want to keep product from a person because if it's there, they grab it, they buy it. If you have to get permission, then to have somebody unlock a cabinet, it's time consuming, it's frustrating. but certain things need to be locked up or they're gonna be stolen. And then if you're a consumer that's coming in for baby formula or shampoo or razor blades or whatever it might be, now they're not even there to buy. They're not even, like, even if you wanted to buy them, they're not there. So the retailers have to look at putting out enough to have enough merchandise so that a consumer coming in can buy it, but then not enough where they're putting out 10 items and the thief comes in and steals 10. Whereas if you have two, like there's a term in retail called one to go, one to show, meaning there's one item so that if somebody buys that one item, now there's one item left. And so it's one to go, one to show. Having two items out versus 10 means somebody's not going to come out and wipe out all 10 of your items. And it's just a strategy. And so looking at those numbers, I would have to see what they were actually, the questions they were asking, where they pulled the stats to see why there was a significant drop. But a lot of it is just employing strategies to prevent the merchandise from being taken. Because I would have to look at it deeper, because there's a lot of strategies that can be employed. For example, I went to a shopping center just a couple weeks ago. It was a clothing store, and I went in there, and the entire section of jeans, men's and women's jeans, there was no employees in this area. Like, I even filmed it. I'm like, there is nobody in this area. But I looked at the jeans, and all the jeans that were over 75, 80 bucks had a cable through them with an alarm device, so that if somebody grabbed the jeans and went out the door or hid them, it would set off an alarm. But
talk about the story, if you would, Darin, the 65-year-old that you actually ran into by coincidence in a store, because people a lot of times think that this kind of stuff is just happening with kids, and that's not always the case.
No, and I talk about situational awareness, and like I said, like, that's just part of my habit. It's a safety habit, and I don't ever turn it off. So I was actually following a retail suspect. We call them boosters. I was following a booster into a sporting goods store, and they're no longer in business, I believe, Sports Authority, so it doesn't matter if I mention it. But I was following the suspect in, and as I was delayed behind the suspect, I allow him to get into the store before I follow them in. There was this older gentleman getting out of a big car right outside the front door. There was a driver, a young kid as the driver, and this older gentleman was getting out, had sweats on. He was balding, gray hair, like a typical senior citizen in Arizona that's out shopping during the day. But he was looking at me, and it was probably because I was moving fast, like I was on a mission, right? My suspect was in the store, and I wasn't so concerned about bystanders. But he was looking at me, and I looked at him and didn't really give it a second thought. Followed my suspect into the store, and while I'm in the store, I keep running into this older gentleman, and he's looking at me, and I'm like, why is this guy looking at me?
Yeah.
Like, there's no reason somebody should be keyed in on me. Well, then he had a glove, a baseball glove, very expensive one, I think $500 or so.
Wow.
And all of a sudden, I saw him, and it was like a flash. Like, I was kind of watching my suspect, and all of a sudden, but this guy was looking, and I saw kind of a flash, and the baseball glove was gone. And I'm like, what happened? Where'd that baseball glove go? And he had sweats on. And I found out later, because we ended up actually switching from our other suspect to this guy. I'm like, this guy is like a professional. So we started doing surveillance over a couple of weeks period of time. And he actually even took a taxi cab one day and hit stores all day in a taxi cab, and found out he was connected with the driver. But this guy, when I looked into his history, he was a career criminal out of Chicago, a professional retail thief his entire life. And so he had actually kind of retired from Chicago, moved to Arizona. And here now you have a senior citizen, ex-con, who's out there, and the guy was smooth. I'm telling you, I've never seen anybody, first of all, sharper to pick up on me, and to watch his surroundings. And then also, and I'm not going to tell you because I don't want the viewers to know how he was doing it, but he was able to defeat all the electrical surveillance systems for alarms and everything, and he was putting them in his sweats. And the guy was a pro. And so, I've worked some other suspects that were even a little bit older, but they were not career criminals. They just kind of fell into the crime to support themselves for whatever reason. So yeah, there you go. And the driver that day was just some 20-year-old kid, who was a drug addict that he would pay to have him drive him around because he didn't have a car. He stayed in a hotel. It was one of those cases. So, we did get him sent to prison for multiple felony crimes for 15 years, and he probably won't get out of prison. He may spend the rest of his life there. But you know what? Like, he knew that going in. He's been doing this his whole life.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't, what's that old cliche? If you can't do the time, don't do the crime. And so, send him to prison.
Yeah.
It happens.
So what advice would you have for retailers? Because there's a lot of, as we referred to, the mom and pop shops that maybe don't have the budget or the ability to hire people like yourself to come in and bust these people that could be fleecing them. What advice do you have for the smaller retail stores to help defend themselves against this kind of crime?
Yeah, just to monitor their inventory and to make sure they don't put out more than's necessary. And then also, depending on how big the store is, when somebody comes in, you got to kind of like get a feel of an individual. And some store owners are in business to be a business. They're just business owners, and a lot of them don't think criminals are going to come in and target me. But a small mom and pop shop targeted by a professional group or an individual, and I don't even talking group, an individual can wreak havoc. An individual can steal $1,000 at a time, easy. And that has a huge impact on a small store that doesn't have a large chain that can absorb thefts from certain regions that are just targeted harder. And these thefts will do that. A mom and pop shop has less cameras generally. And if they do have cameras, they're generally better than a big chain, but there's nobody monitoring them. So you get it after the fact. You have a camera up on the wall and there's your person. Well, you can keep a hat on. I'm not going to give tips, but some of my pros wear baseball caps. So I'm like this now. You can't identify my face. And some cameras, that's what you get, is the top of a head. Mm-hmm. So a small shop or mom and pop shop, they just need to be really aware of what's going on. And if there's somebody in there that they don't feel comfortable about, like they're getting a bad feeling, go give them the best customer service they can and just hang with them. And customer service will usually drive them away, because we all want customer service. I needed customer service 2 weeks ago and it wasn't there, and I had access to everything I wanted in a store, and I could have been successful. But if you want a suspect to move on and see that you're a hardened target, go give that person customer service until they're like, okay, like I can't even breathe anymore, I'm out of here. That's a really good strategy.
Yeah. Excellent stuff. So even the security systems that you mentioned, and you didn't want to get into details of how these systems are defeated, but some retailers, even big box retailers, rely upon these electronic devices to be their security. And you're saying that's actually not a very good strategy.
No, what it's going to do is deter the teenager that comes in and wants to steal a pair of jeans. It'll deter them because they don't understand how the system works. But the professionals know how to defeat it. And if they can't even defeat the alarm system itself, just their strategy alone will defeat the system, if that makes any sense. I don't want to go into details, so I'm careful here, but the professionals do it for a living, and the professionals know how to do it. And you may get some evidence when a professional individual or group hits, but you're not going to prevent the crime, if that makes sense. If they want to steal from you, they're going to steal from you. I don't care what you put out. You can put a security guard with a gun at the front door. They will still come in, they'll grab what they want, and they'll leave. And basically when they go out, they'll flip you the bird. And how do I know this? Because I worked a group that was doing that. They hired armed security, and it didn't matter. So that's where you got to start thinking of other strategies. And that's why when I work for clients and work organized retail crime, my strategy is I'm in the shadows. I get all the evidence. I film them. I might do undercover purchases. I get all the evidence, compile it all. They don't even know I'm there. And then I partner with law enforcement, and then we get them charged. And all of a sudden they have 8-10 crimes, and they don't even know what happened. And it's all safe. And there's no like racial profiling involved. There's a criminal profile, right? I mean, if I'm following you and you might be of an ethnic group, that's irrelevant. The fact is I got you on film stealing something. So I don't care what race you are. equal opportunity employer, right? So, so yeah,
Equal opportunity crime buster.
there you go. And that's also a reality with retailers, is that, let's say they have a group that comes in that is a minority group. Now they have to be very sensitive about being 100% sure if they even confront them about a theft, because if there wasn't a theft, now they get sued. And there's at least 2 retailers that, and you can Google them if you want, but they paid out millions of dollars on a couple of false detentions. Mm-hmm. That's what they are, is false detentions, civil rights violation. So retailers have really stepped back, and they're afraid to act because they don't want to get, they don't want liability. Where if you have a team, and there's a lot of retailers with teams too that do what I do for clients, and those teams will go out, find the group or the individual, do surveillance, get the intelligence, get with law enforcement. That's the best strategy, I would say. Put some deterrence, but you still have to be proactive.
You know, the other thing too is I'm just thinking here. I don't work in your line of work, so the specific types of details wouldn't necessarily stand out to me. But let me share with you something that I did notice in this article that we really opened this whole deal up. $2 million by this Tampa, Florida. It looks like mostly clothing-related stores were ones hit. And here's the last names of all the bad guys that were picked up. All in their 30s and looks like early, even some late 40s. But the last names of the people picked up here were Martinez, Rodriguez, Hernandez, Torres, Benitez, and Jimenez. So I think from a law enforcement standpoint, it kind of helps to know what a given type of culture and or race might be targeting in the way of what they're stealing when they're walking in your store.
No, absolutely. And I can tell you straight up, like when I have worked cases involving items being stolen, like jeans and some of the Crest whitening strips and the lotions and potions and all that, at least in Arizona, I would say 90% of the groups were Hispanic based, and a lot of the items that they were actually stealing were going into Mexico, or they were ending up at flea markets. But one of the largest cases that I worked in Arizona, it was called Mall Raiders, and they had been arrested years ago, and so we called the new feature Mall Raiders 2, and it was a Hispanic group targeting outlet malls, and because outlet malls typically don't have the camera coverage that a shopping center does, they were hitting these outlet malls all over Arizona, California, and Nevada, and hundreds of thousands of dollars, and they were a Hispanic based group. And so they were targeting those clothing items that are typically sold on the black market in the Hispanic community. So there you go. Whoops. Yep, there goes my camera.
All right. Well, that's going to be a wrap here on Master Surveillant Mindset. Thanks, everybody, for joining us here on the broadcast. Great information, as always, Darin. And you have a huge task in front of you here this week with getting moved into your new digs.
I do. Just landed back in the Wild West yesterday, and it's good to be back.
All right. Very good. Darin Fredrickson, Kevin Hunter, and Kyle Torgerson here on Northwest Digital News on Master Surveillant Mindset. Thanks for joining us.
This concludes today's live programming on Northwest Digital News. Thanks for joining us for this special broadcast. Heard around the world in more than 70 countries on YouTube, Instagram, Patreon, Facebook, and Twitch TV. If you enjoyed a story or guest we had here on Northwest Digital News and would like to strut your stuff on the broadcast, email us today at wainfo2017@gmail.com or call or text 360-545-3501. We're always interested in unique stories, topics, and guests to share with our worldwide audience. Before you go, don't forget to give us a big thumbs up and comment on the live stream. And for those of you who'd like to financially support the broadcast, you can do so at patreon.com/Northwest Digital News. We thank you for your patronage. On behalf of Chris Bornstead, Kyle Torgerson, Stephanie Hunter, and all the people that made this broadcast possible, I'm Kevin Hunter. Till next time, take care.